Welcome to the Diabetic Mogul Podcast. In this podcast, we offer standard and recommended practice of not only managing your diabetes but how you can get involved by advocating for proper access to healthcare. Join us in this season as we host various guests from the diabetes community from around the world to learn from their shared experiences and their expert opinions, as some are patients living with diabetes and some as healthcare providers. I'm your host, Tinotenda Zigit, the Diabetic Mogul, patient advocate, a Toastmaster, financial intelligence expert with the vision of empowering, educate, inspire the diabetes community in the best way I know how. On this episode, we are pleased to host one of our greatest friends and special guest from the Northern Ireland, John Adams, who is selfless, and I could describe her as a philanthropist in the diabetes community. She's a midwife, PhD researcher, patient advocate, public health educator, to mention but a few. Dawn, please take it away.
My name's Dawn. I was diagnosed with diabetes on the 5th of April 1993, so this is going to be my 29th anniversary coming up this year, just before Easter.
It's a huge privilege to host someone whom we have known for quite some time. I mean, a big shout out to the Deed of Voices program, where we got to know each other. And now that you are on this show, will you briefly share with us your experiences for your diabetes diagnosis?
So in the weeks coming up to Easter, I had lost a significant amount of weight. I never weighed a huge amount anyway. I weighed about 50 kilos, but in the week of my diagnosis, my weight was 34 kilos. So I lost quite a lot of weight. I was so very tired. I was in my final year at university. Every time I sat down to do any writing or to fill in application forms for jobs, I literally just fell asleep. I was so very thirsty as well. That was the other thing. I remember taking 2 litres of bottles of water with me to bed at night. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I had that bottle completely emptied. I would get up, I would refill the bottle. I would get up again about 5:30, 6 o'clock and refill the bottle. As soon as I get up, I would have had 2 or 3 cups of tea before I was heading out. And I just kept drinking. I could not drink enough to quench the thirst that I had. And I felt so ill, obviously, because I was drinking so much. I was running to the bathroom a lot as well. And people kept saying, if you didn't drink so much, you wouldn't need to go to the bathroom. I said, but I'm so thirsty. I cannot get enough to drink. It was like a cycle of sleeping, drinking, running to the bathroom. My clothes were hanging on me. I was having to use belts to hold up any skirts or any trousers that I had. I hadn't realized just how thin I was. My friends at university were actually really concerned. They told me a couple of years ago, whenever I met them again, that they thought I had anorexia because I'd lost so much weight so very quickly. And they thought that because I was drinking so much fluid, that it was me trying to fill my stomach with water so that I didn't have to eat meals. And they thought that because I was so tired, that it was because I wasn't eating enough. And I was eating normally, but it was the thirst was the real thing. And running to the bathroom, the sleep were unreal. By the time I actually got to the GP the morning that I was diagnosed, every time I opened my hands, creases in my hands just bled. So the creases in my fingers, the creases in my palms just cracked. I was so badly dehydrated because obviously of type 1, and I had no idea really that what was going on and what diabetes involved. So it was a complete shock. It was a complete surprise to actually get that diagnosis that day from the doctor.
I mean, this is really great. And maybe because now that with how you've shared your story, maybe if I could ask to say, what is it like to live with diabetes in Northern Ireland?
Initially, it was, it's generally quite lonely because people here would tend to be quite private and don't really share actual health conditions. Whenever you meet somebody and you haven't seen them for ages, you'll say to them, hi, how are you? And everybody just goes, oh yeah, I'm fine. But I'm fine can mean anything from I've just been diagnosed with terminal cancer to I've had the best day of my life ever. I'm fine is just a blanket term that folk use. But the day that I was diagnosed and I went into the hospital, there was a girl who I was friendly with from school, from university. And I grew up going to Girl Guides, and I knew her from Guides as well. She'd been diagnosed the same day. And I thought, great, the two of us can start this whole new life together, because obviously this is not something that's ever going to be cured. It's not something that's going to be fixed. We actually lost contact very quickly afterwards because she and her boyfriend had decided to travel the world. So off they went. Didn't see her again for 18, 19 years. And in the meantime, I hadn't come across anyone else who had a diagnosis of type 1 who was dealing with it in any obvious or overt way until maybe 4 or 5 years later, I met a girl who had type 1, whose sister had also had type 1, but had died from complications of type 1 at the age of 19. And that really highlighted how serious the condition was. When you're in hospital and you're being told these things, you listen, but you don't actually absorb that information or apply that information because it seemed quite abstract. It's like something that you're never actually going to be faced with. And it's almost like a stick to ensure that you do the things that you're meant to do, that the hospital want you to do for the sake of the doctors, for the sake of the nurses in the clinics. It's not because it actually matters on a day-to-day level. And I think a lot of us still feel very much like that when we're working to have good numbers, whenever we're trying to have better blood pressure levels, when we're trying to maintain our weight. We're not trying to do it so much for us. It always feels like we're trying to do it for other people. So they give us approval for the things that we've done. And it wasn't until the year before lockdown, so it had been around the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, that I met with a number of folk who had type 1 diabetes because I'd started to volunteer with a diabetes charity. And I suddenly found my tribe. I'd already found a tribe on social media pages, but I suddenly found a real tribe who lived in the same country as me, who lived within a 20-minute drive from my house, who I was able to meet up with, talk to, and discover that, we all shared exactly the same experiences. We all had similar worries. We had similar concerns. We were able to celebrate victories together whenever we had an HbA1c that we were willing to share with other people. We were willing to share information that we had learned along the way, tips for managing day-to-day life, for talking to other people. And it actually gave me an awful lot more courage. I think I've never hidden the fact that I've type 1 from anybody, more from the point of it being quite a private society that I've grown up in. I always felt that if I had a work problem as a direct result of my blood glucose levels, the shame of that was slightly reduced by people knowing that I had diabetes, and it was because my blood sugar wasn't where it should be at that point in time. That made it slightly less awful whenever I did have moments in work when things weren't going my way in terms of my blood glucose levels. And it was really quite refreshing that it wasn't seen as a fault on my part necessarily, and that it wasn't seen as a criticism of the work that I did. People actually rallied around and were quite supportive for the most part. But obviously, whenever you're working in a workplace where most of the folk with diabetes are people who are travelling through your workplace, not actually based in your workplace, it changed the staff responses to folk with diabetes in our care.
I wanted to ask you maybe the significance of peer support.
I think it's really important that you have other folk who understand exactly what it's like to live with the same condition. Everybody lives with it very differently, and everybody manages their diabetes in a very different way. Everybody has very different emotional responses to it. But the fact that every last one of us are relying on blood glucose readings, we're relying on our insulin that we have to get on prescription or that we have to buy from a chemist, that we give through injections, either directly from syringes, from insulin pens, from insulin pumps. We all know what that's like. We all have had times where our insulin hasn't worked normally, produced physiological insulin work. We've all had times where pen needles have really very painful to use. And that's something that never gets any easier, no matter how many years you live with diabetes, no matter how many improvements are made to the length and the thickness of needles. You're still having to do something which is not normal because your body's meant to do all of those things. But when you have peer support, everybody has had those moments where they found it very frustrating that their pancreas isn't working, their insulin isn't working, their blood glucose readings aren't what you want your blood glucose readings to be. And whenever you don't have peer support, you feel very lonely because you're always explaining to other people why your numbers look like this, why you're taking this much insulin, why you're not having this to eat, why you're having something else to eat instead, why you're having so much juice, why you're not having enough juice. You just constantly have to validate every decision that you make. You have to feel like you're constantly explaining to other people that your broken body doesn't do the things that their not broken body does. And other people just don't quite get the nuances of living living with this condition. But when you have your peers, you can go out and it doesn't matter that your numbers aren't perfect. It doesn't matter that you're eating something that other people can't understand why you're eating it, or you don't have to eat something. You don't have to keep validating your experience. You don't have to keep validating all of your choices, all of your decisions, all of your actions. And you don't have, your peers never ask you, oh, should you be eating that? Oh, should you be injecting that much insulin? Should you be injecting that insulin in that part of your body? Are you not meant to inject it in this part of your body? You don't have that criticism, but you do have an awful lot of peer support. You do have people who actually get what it means to live a life that outside of normal, but still be able to achieve things that are normal. Maybe not as straightforwardly because you're dealing with hypers or you're dealing with hypos, or you've gone to work and you've forgotten to take your insulin, or you've gone to work and you've forgotten to take your blood glucose test kit. People with normal working pancreases get really frustrated that you can walk out of the house without those things. They don't realise, yeah, I maybe had 16 other things going on before I left the house, and that's why I didn't put them into my bag. That's why I didn't pop those things into my pocket. But your peers get that. They totally understand because they've done it themselves. As I say, there's very little that any of us have ever done, or very few things that any of us have ever gone through that no one else with diabetes has ever experienced, that no one else has ever managed to make the same mistakes or have the same slip-ups or have the same issues with. And it's really reassuring that you're not the only person who had a blood glucose of 27. You're not the only person who pen needle broke. You're not the only person who ran out of blood test strips at work. You're not the only person whose pump battery died whenever you were halfway through your working day or driving home from work or on an aeroplane. You're not the only person who ever forgot to take your insulin somewhere when you went out for the day. So I think that's really important. You need that. You need other people who understand that, because you get a lot of benefit. It just makes the whole journey with diabetes so much less lonely and so much less painful, so much less judgmental. And you realise that it's okay. Leaving the house 1 or 2 days without insulin isn't actually going to mean that you end up back in the hospital again. It doesn't mean that you're doing long-term damage, but you need other people to be able to share those experiences with, who can understand it. And quite often, people without diabetes don't find that really funny. People with diabetes find it absolutely hilarious because they've been there. They know what it's like. And as I say, it makes you feel so much less lonely.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. However, that is you're going to be speaking to them. So, moving on to the next segment of our show for the Hypoglycaemia Unawareness. So maybe if you could describe to the audience how it is, what it is, Hypoglycaemia Unawareness. Some people, they feel like it's weird. What is that? I feel severe hunger, and when they want to treat it, they want to eat until they feel take heavy caps when they have hypoglycemia. At times when sugars are on the two. So maybe if you can share with us what it is.
So hypoglycemia is where your blood glucose level drops below 4 millimoles. That's determined as hypoglycemia. Once your blood glucose goes below 4, your brain goes into like a survival mode. The command centers in your brain start telling your body to circulate blood just to your brain, to your heart, to your liver, to your kidneys. So essential organs. So one of the things that can do is cause your lips to feel quite tingly, or your tongue to feel larger than normal because the sensations change in your body. People can become very confused. Quite often, as the blood glucose continues to drop, then you find that you start to sweat because your liver's working hard to try and pump out glucagon to get those blood sugar levels back up again. So even though you don't produce insulin, you do still produce glucagon, but the feedback loop whenever you have type 1 diabetes means that the glucagon production isn't as effective as it would be in someone without diabetes, because your hypoglycemia is generally caused by having too much insulin in your body for whatever reason. Sometimes it'll be after exercise. It can be when you get very stressed. It can be if you haven't eaten when you should have, or you haven't eaten enough carbohydrate, enough fruit, enough vegetables. Even enough fat or protein will have an impact on your blood glucose as well. If you've had alcohol to drink, your blood glucose will drop. Some people have hypoglycemia whenever they're sick, because we all work in very different ways. For some people, they have very high blood glucose levels whenever they're sick. For some people, they have very low blood glucose levels because their body's trying to fight off the infection. Again, we all work in different ways. We all have different responses within our bodies that are triggers. And again, sometimes just whenever you're very tired, it can mean that you're using up whatever glucose is in your blood much more quickly, because your body is trying to compensate for the fact that you're so tired, your muscles are having to work harder, your brain's having to work harder. And because glucose is the preferred energy source for your brain, even if you're doing academic work, if you're revising for exams, if you're in an exam room, if you are writing an assignment, you can be more prone to having hypoglycemic episodes